grown-up books, and the ways in which maybe translating children's books is different from translating grown-up books. If you think about books for relatively young children, how are they different from most grown-up stories?
They have very simple words.
Okay, simple language.
Contain less words, more illustrations, less words.
Okay, so more illustrations, definitely that's important, and fewer words probably. Rhythm and that kind of thing. What else? Imaginative.
May I say something? But in Kitty's stories, just of stories, the language is not very common or simple.
No.
It's very deep class.
Yeah, it's quite complex.
So what you said about privacy law, there are also a lot of words, knowledge by a human word. So it's also not just simple language.
So the language, it can be quite playful sometimes. But it's not just a matter of using difficult words, it's neologisms and it's being quite playful with language.
There are a lot of things that are implied, like most straightforward.
Reading little lines.
Yeah, that's why when you read the same fairy tale and you're like, oh, there is like, oh, there are good messages there.
Which you didn't notice when you were... What about, you mentioned in the illustrated often, which is important, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. There's also something which is absolutely fundamental about books for, let's say, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, which is different from books for older people. You said you have a 3-year-old? Boy or girl?
Boy.
And does he like books?
He likes them, but he doesn't spend much time.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you read to him?
Yeah.
Or did you sometimes before bed or something? You sometimes read?
I read to him, yeah.
And he doesn't read to himself?
Sometimes he shows interest taking the book and reading himself.
But he doesn't, but he can't read the
No,
words
he can't read it.
because he's 3.
Yeah.
There will come a point when he is older when he will be able to read the words himself. But one of the things that's very different about books for young children compared to older people is they aren't reading the books themselves. Someone else is reading the book to them. And that makes an enormous difference in how the text works. One of the reasons you talked about things like the rhythm of the text and repetition is because they're read aloud. If you're reading to someone, it has to sound right, because it's going to be spoken aloud. If you're reading a book to a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, what are they looking at?
The illustrations.
And they look at the illustrations. So there are 2 things that are happening when they are experiencing a book being read to them. Others of you may have children or may have little brothers and sisters or nephews or whatever. So most of you probably have read a book to a small child at least once. And what's happening when you do that? This child is listening to the words and they are themselves reading the pictures. They're interpreting the pictures. And there is somewhere in their brain these things are connected. The words which are coming in through here and the pictures which are coming in through here. Which is different from our experience of reading. Because we see words and we can decode what's happening in the text. So one of the things that's really important to think about for books for younger children is the relationship between the words and the pictures. The relationship is not, if the book is a good book, I'm going to show you in a moment, that relationship is not arbitrary, and one of the reasons it's not arbitrary is because the child is getting a narration in their ear and they're reading the pictures in front of them. It's really important to think about actually how these things are consumed. It's completely unique, I think. Children's picture books, the only way of telling a story I can think of that's like that. So I'm going to talk to you about a very strange book. Just temporarily disappeared. Thank you. Which I hope you can more or less see. It's a little bit bright, but you have to use your imagination a little bit. More or less. You can also come closer if you need to. That's right. Good better? Anyway, you have to get right. And do just come bring your chairs forward if you think it's easier. You're not going to have to write anything down, so, you know. Anyway, this is a book which was originally published in Portuguese. It's a picture book for youngish children by this woman, Stella Grace, who is originally Bulgarian and who was in Germany. The title is, no one speaks Portuguese. Happiness is? So, happiness. Menasia is watermelon. Watermelon. Cabeza, okay, very good. So happiness is a watermelon on your head. So I gather there is some people with a little bit of Spanish, some people speak a bit of Spanish, and a bit of French, and a bit of Italian. Right, so even without Portuguese you can muddle through. So it's called Happiness is a Watermelon on Your Head. It's a slightly weird title, but it gets weirder. I'm just going to run through very quickly and do a kind of literal, very boring translation of the text, just so you can see what we're dealing with. And you have to just take my word for it that they're very beautiful pictures. Because you can probably see on the screen, more or less, actually, you can see the screen, just what the colours look like. Colour palettes, rather wonderful. So, the text says, more or less, the following. At the end of the village, in a little house in whose garden grew flowers and wild trees, lived Miss Luminosa, which means luminous, literally Miss Luminous, Miss Glowing, something like that, and her pet boar, which has a wild boar, Melvin. Every morning they would climb one of the tallest trees and fill the air with the warm sound of her cello and his old, long-forgotten songs. So we have Miss Luminosa playing the cello at the top of the tree, and the boar, Melvin, singing songs. And you could always hear her free and easy laughter, and you could see her leaping about and dancing all over the place. This and many other strange things awoke a whole heap of questions and a lot of curiosity in her three neighbours, Miss Austera, Miss Lamuria, and Miss Julieta. Austera means austere, Miss Austere, Miss Lamuria is lament, and Miss Julieta is like a grouch, like a curmudgeon. So we have Miss Happy and then Miss Lament and curmudgeon. The three women decided they were going to figure out what Miss Luminosa's secret was. So one day, as the three women were watching from their posts, they saw Miss Luminosa floating down the road, all happy and humming to herself. And on her head, they could see she was wearing the shell of a watermelon. At last, so that was Miss Luminosa's secret. There is Miss Luminosa wearing the shell of a watermelon on her head. And so the three impatient women decided to rifle through her fridge. They took up everything they could find. Miss Austera got the radishes, Miss Lamuria took hold of the cauliflower, Miss Julieta picked up the fish. My God, how lovely, the three of them sighed, looking at themselves in the mirror. And so, just like that, one of them with the cauliflower, another with the radishes, another with the fish on her head, the three women feeling really quite special. They went to have a wander down the road, up and down and up the road, all day long, all kind of preening, done up and preening. They walked and they looked and listened for a sign that anything was happening to them, but there was nothing happening at all. Miss Arstella, Miss Amboy, and Miss Hayeta were deeply disappointed and really unhappy all over again. Next page, two girls you can see there, but it's them being unhappy. No text on this page, just a picture. And then they decided to make an even greater effort, and out of their hats arose even stranger works of art that were welded and stuck and constructed with all possible imaginable kinds of things. Even these unfortunate women's attempt to hoist a cello up a tree didn't have the magical effect desired. The three women fell down from there like three large ripe fruits. Not even all the strange pets, the wild boar, the elephant, the coloured birds, the hippopotami, the giraffes, and every possible species of monkey managed to change the state of mind of these three women and their terrible mood. Again, the colours on here, you can imagine what it looks like from there. And again, we have another picture of them being sad, without any text. In particular, the animals were also sad. That is very sad, whatever it is. Thank you.
You need it now?
No, not that else. And then one fine day, as they were dragging themselves along the street, wearing their hats, one of them has a rocking horse thing, one has a clock, one has a sort of TV with a ballet dancer. As they were dragging themselves down the street with their hats, as desperate as ever, something flew over their heads and spluttered at their feet. A watermelon. Attack! They suddenly heard Miss Luminaza's voice. Fighting you for throwing watermelons. Again, a page with lovely words. And before they were even able to understand what was happening, the three women, completely stunned, were right in the middle of a real watermelon massacre. I should say, when I first showed this to a friend who's a publisher, he said, you can't really use massacre in a picture book for children. And then at a certain moment, when there they were, spread eagled on the floor, Miss Labulia, Miss Hayeta, and Miss Hofstede looked at one another. They had a whole heap of watermelon seeds stuck all over their hair, their clothes, their faces. My God, how beautiful, the three of them sighed. And they loved, and they loved, and they loved. The end. So it's a slightly strange book. At least I can get it. Yes, it's a bit strange, it's slightly funny. It's a very weird book. But I love it mostly because I love the illustrations. And afterwards, come and have a browse on here. I was commissioned to produce a translation of this book. So published first in Portuguese, and I was commissioned to produce a translation that publishes in English. So first of all, there are some obvious things I have to decide to do. I have to decide, for example, which happens a lot with children's books. What am I going to do with the characters' names? You wouldn't normally, if you're translating War and Peace, you wouldn't decide to change all the characters' names. On the other hand, I hope, having said there are no rules, there are in fact some rules. But in the case of this book, it's quite obvious, I hope, that because the names actually have a meaning, one of the things you want to think about is what you're going to call the characters. So we have Miss Luminosa, which literally means Miss Luminous, she's the happy one. And then Miss Grumpy, Miss Lament, and Miss, whatever the other one was, Austere. Those, by the way, are terrible names, but some version of that, some names that mean something a little bit like that. There's another name in this book which is in a way more problematic, which is Melvin. Melvin is the wild boar, who's Miss Lumina's pet. Melvin is very problematic for me. I had to decide what I was going to do with him because Melvin's a pretty funny name for a wild boar or for anything. But it's not a Portuguese name, it's an English name. And so I had to decide if I'm going to keep him as Melvin, which is a pretty funny name for me, or whether I'm going to translate it, as it were, into a weird name, because the Portuguese readers are going to read that as a kind of weird, exotic name. The English readers, if I keep it as Melvin, it'll seem like a really normal, kind of down-to-earth name. So one of the decisions I have to make is, what am I going to call this really strange animal? It was only mentioned by name at the very beginning. His name isn't mentioned again. I decided in this case that I was going to keep him Melvin, even though that has a very different effect on the readers compared to Portuguese ones, just because I think it's funny. No other reason than that makes it funny. One thing which is always going to be an issue in translating picture books comes back to what I said a moment ago about the way in which the text and the pictures work together, which is to do with the way these books are consumed. Someone, the child, listening to the words and reading the pictures and so on. So one thing that I had to do when I was translating this is I had to be aware of what the pictures were doing, even if I was translating the words. What you cannot do is look at the Portuguese words, take them away over here, translate them somehow into English, and then kind of dump them back on top of the pictures and hope it's going to work. Because if the picture book is a good one, then the relationship between the text and the picture is going to be quite precise. There'll be some really interesting things happening in the relationship between the words and the pictures. I happen to think that in this particular book, the relationship between the words and the picture is not terribly well done. And so one of the things I thought about was whether I could produce a translation that suited the pictures better than the original suited the pictures. Whether I was allowed to do that and whether that was a worthwhile thing to do. Whether that's still a translation or whether it's something else. So I started thinking about how I could improve that relationship between the text and produce an English text which works really well with the pictures in a way that the original text doesn't. So what I'm doing now is I'm not simply translating 500 Portuguese words. I'm translating this entire unit, which is text and pictures working together, into another unit, as though it's an organic thing, with text and pictures working together. So I'm thinking the whole time about, even though I'm just translating words, I'm thinking about what the child is seeing while you're reading the book to you. And part of it is to do with being quite specific about the way the child is looking at pictures. In this page, you may remember the text says, not even all of the different weird kind of pets. And then it lists them. The different coloured birds and all the different species of monkey and the hippopotamus and the rhinos and whatever it is. And if you're a child, when the person is telling you the story, you look at the animals, so you find the animals. And in fact, when you're reading, you don't just read the text, because you read the text, you say, monkeys. Can you see the monkeys? Where are the monkeys? How many monkeys are there? Well, can you see another monkey? The whole experience is very interactive. It's not simply a kind of flat delivery of an unchanging story. So on this page, I think it's great, because the text says monkeys, and with your eye you can find the monkeys and birds, and giraffes. I think it's an incredibly beautiful giraffe, by the way. And you can, as you're the child looking at the pictures, you can find the things that are in the text. The connection is very close. On the other hand, this page just says they made their hats out of all different possible kinds of things, which is fine, but it's really ignoring actually what's happening in this picture. Because this picture is not a vague thing, it's very specific. You know, there's a fork, and there's a cuckoo clock, and there's a screwdriver, there's a key, and there's a rocking horse, and there's an axe thing, and a book, and a ruler. They're all particular things, but there's nothing in the text to make you look at those things. So one of the things I thought I could do, maybe, if I'm allowed, is include in the English text some of the things that are in the picture that's not in the original text. So again, I'm not really translating the text anymore, but I'm translating the pictures into English. So that's one thing I thought I made a change. Here's another. Actually, stay on this page. This page, this is what the text says at the moment. They walked and they looked and they listened for a trace that something was happening to them, but there was nothing happening at all. Miss Austen and Miss Napoleon and Miss Hayek were deeply disappointed and unhappy all over again. Did they look deeply disappointed and unhappy to you?
It says that they're only in Korea or something.
Yes, they're still, at the moment, the beginning bit, when they start walking around with all their lovely hats on their heads, that's fine, but the text then says, and then they became really sad. But that's not on this page. The really sad picture is the next page. The pictures are slightly late. You have to get to the next page before you see a picture. They're slightly out of sync, which will be fine, except the child is reading the pictures, which means the child is trying to make sense of the story they're being told. And actually this doesn't make any sense at all. And they have to wait to be given the picture of them being sad. There are some picture books where there is a disconnection between the text and the pictures, which is deliberate, and which does very specific, interesting things. I can give you examples. But in this case, it seems just to be not quite right. Particularly if you have this page, which again, you have to trust me, is very beautiful, but there are no words in it. And they could be words. It's a perfect opportunity to put some text, some them being sad text on here. There are some of the best picture books in the world have pages without any text, but it's very, very hard to do that. It's very hard to make that work. And in this case, even without changing the words I use, but just changing where I put them, just shoving them along a little bit, I could easily say, there they were, walking down, waiting for something to happen. Did anything happen? No, they were just really sad again. So it's not a matter of, even if I keep exactly in change the symbol of the word, but just kind of shove the words along a little bit. Again, am I allowed to do this? I don't know. When I read you the finished version, you will tell me whether you think it's a terrible transgression or not. You're allowed to think it's a transgression. I think it's a transgression too, so I like it. So that's one question, is whether I can make it work better as a kind of functioning whole unit. Just by repositioning the text, just by flowing the text onto the page slightly differently. It's not even about changing the text. One thing I wanted to think about is what the mode of picture books is typically in English. Because again, I'm translating the text and the story and all those things, but I'm also translating for a particular readership. And I want to have to think about what are the things that characterize good picture books. One thing which I noticed when I read this through is there is almost no direct speech. The characters hardly speak at all. There are those two moments when they look at themselves and say, my God, how beautiful. And then there is the word, attack! And that's it. There's no other direct speech. And direct speech is great for picture books because direct speech is much easier to read aloud. You want to do everything you can to make this easy to read aloud because, first of all, as we said, these books are created in order to be spoken. And also, unlike any other art form I can think of, they're created specifically to be spoken by people who are not professional speakers, professional readers aloud. It's not like a play, which is created to be spoken, but it's created to be spoken by people whose job it is to be able to do this. Picture books are created to be read by people who are not experts, who are not performers, who are not whatever. And so anything that's going to make it easy to express, easy to read, easy to find the rhythm in it. And one of the things that makes it easy is putting in direct speech. And there were lots of instances here where I thought I could do that. So instead of saying, Miss Alster had a brilliant idea, you say, I got a brilliant idea, said Miss Alster. That's different, but it's also not really different. It's not different in terms of substance. But it's an enormous amount easier to read. If you have these moments where people say, I know what we can do, we can get a pact, said so-and-so, instead of so-and-so had the idea that maybe they could get a pact. So one possibility is I can add direct speech if I'm allowed to do something. I wanted to add more of Melvin, who's only named once, but appears in the pictures lots of times. Because again, it's something as a child looking at the pictures I happen to be looking out for. Because there he is, flying through the air in the middle of the watermelon massacre. And there he is on the floor, where you see that this is him with the three women covered in watermelon all over the floor. And I wanted to put more of Melvin in the text because I think he's funny. No other reason. But I'm not really putting in something that's not there. I'm looking at the pictures and putting what's in the pictures into the text. The most significant structural thing that I thought I could do, there are some things to do with just the complexity of certain sentences, like the one about the pets, which is a more complex sentence than I think it needs to be. Not even all the strange pets, such as blah, 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 could change the state of mind of these women in this terrible mood. I think we can simplify those structures. But one of the things that I think is quite important in terms of making structural changes is to do with something I said a moment ago about where we position the text and not just what the text says. One of the things that you will learn if you spend a lot of time reading picture books is that within the architecture of a picture book, unlike every other novel or every other piece of writing that starts at the beginning of the page and keeps going till the end, with a picture book, the place where the page turns is significant. As part of the architectural construction of a picture book, that's a very significant moment. And again, it's part of making it easy for the people who are reading to read it. And so the turn of the page is a way to control the pace of the reading for children's book. It's also something which controls the movement of the story, which could be, for example, asking a question. And then you turn the page and there is an answer. It creates a space. So as I ask a question, it could be ... And it was, you turn the page, so we have a problem on this page. Because the text says, three women decided they were going to figure out what Miss Lumina's secret was. One day, the three ladies were standing in there, watching from their house. They saw Miss Lumina's floating down the road, all happy and humming to herself. And on her hedge, they could see she was wearing the shell of a watermelon. Except it's not there. Because It's only when you turn the page, you see the watermelon. And the text says, this is a kind of wasted bit of text, it just says, at last, so that was Miss Umanana's secret. So my next question is, can I use that really basic thing, that architectural thing, where you turn the page, to make things like that work better? It may be, for example. One day, the three ladies were watching from their posts. They saw Miss Miller floating down the road, happily humming to herself, and on her head, they could see she was wearing ... a watermelon. It means the child notices what's in the picture. It means the text is connected to the pictures much better. It means the page turn has an effect. It's partly to do with suspense, because the first time you read it, you don't know what she's going to have on her head, though it is in the title of the book, so it's possibly indication. But again, that's not even about changing the text. Even if I use exactly the same words, I'm just thinking about the impact of the text on the people who are using it, who are consuming it. Anyway, I did a first translation of this book, first draft, which was terrible, which is more or less like the draft, when I translated it for you at the very beginning. It more or less said that. So it was quite flat. It was quite, flat and prosy, not very interesting. It didn't connect terribly well with the pictures, but it was faithful, to use a word from this morning. But faithful, I think, to the wrong thing. Because it was faithful to the Portuguese text, to the words, to the shape of the sentences, etc. But I think completely not in the spirit of the book, and certainly not in the spirit of the pictures. Because frankly, in that version I read you at the beginning, the pictures were much more interesting than the text. The text is a little bit weird, but it wasn't interesting writing. Whereas the pictures, again, you have to believe me, are very spiky and odd and really interesting colours and really interesting. So I went and had a meeting with the publisher, and we looked through that version. And she said, she's very polite, she didn't say this is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. But she said, it's good. But maybe feel a little bit freer to do something with it. Don't feel so attached to the text, and think a little bit more as though, imagine there were no text there and you had the pictures and you had to write just for the pictures. And so I'm walking away from my meeting with my publisher, Anna, and walking past King's Cross Station. I know exactly where I was when I had my great epiphanic moment. I had one of the lines in my head. The bit when the watermelon splatters down at their feet. I had this line in my head, and it flew through the air and came down with a splat. That was the line I had from the original version. And it flew through the air and came down with a splat. And it kind of went round and round in my head, that line. And then I realized that the reason it was going round and round in my head was because it's a perfect line of verse. And it flew through the air and came down with a splat. It's a perfect 12-syllable. It's an anapastic tetrameter, apparently. It's 4 things of da-da-da. And it flew through the air and came down with a splat. And that particular verse form is, in fact, a verse form that's used in lots and lots of children's books, including some of my favorites. The Cat in the Hat, one of the great American picture books, Dr. Seuss. And they looked and they saw him step in on the mat, and they looked and they saw him, the Cat in the Hat. There's a contemporary British children's writer called Julia Donaldson, the most successful picture writer in the world at the moment. One of her books is called Room on the Broom. And they looked for the one, but no one could be found. There's a T.S. Eliot poem from Cass, Gus, the cat at the theatre door, his name was able to have told you the film. And it looked in this thing, and then the mountain, and it looked in this thing, the cat in the hat. And it flew through the air and came down with a splat. So I sent them an email standing outside King's Cross Station saying, would you mind if my translation were rhyming? And would you mind if my translation were in verse? And would that be allowed? And Emma very bravely and possibly thinking that I wasn't going to take this very seriously, said, sure, why not? So I now have a slightly new constraint to my work. I'm going to try and make those changes that I described earlier to try and make it better, but I'm going to do it in rhyming verse. Rhyming verse has many things that make it difficult. Many things that make it difficult. But it means that, in fact, all of those things I described earlier are now going to have to be changed because, for example, if I'm thinking about the new names for the characters, well, those names might now have to rhyme with something. Those names might now have a certain number of syllables to fit into a particular place in the lines. There will be places where I couldn't just do whatever the picture said because I'd have to find a way of making it work within a rhyme. So in this page, how about this for a rhyming couplet? So they ran to her kitchen and rummaged about for a nice bunch of radishes, cauliflower, fish. That's a perfect, those are perfect metric lines. Except the fish doesn't rhyme with about. What type of fish? Carp doesn't rhyme with about. Trout, there we go. So they ran to the kitchen and rummaged about for a nice bunch of radishes, cauliflower, trout. Now, I have no idea whether this is supposed to be a trout. I suspect it probably isn't. But it's going to be a trout now. So again, while I have the constraints from the pictures, I also now have a whole new constraint because I've decided that my translation is going to obey certain rules. I do have one very serious problem at this point. If you are writing in that particular meter, there is one word that you cannot use. What is the word that I cannot use in this translation? It's an important word.
Watermelon.
Watermelon. So I now found myself in a position where I have a book about watermelon in which I can't use the word watermelon. Because watermelon, you would have to pronounce it as watermelon or watermelon for it to fit into the meter. It doesn't, we don't pronounce it like that. Watermelon. Why do you pronounce the first syllable? You pronounce the first and third. Watermelon. What you never do is pronounce the second or fourth syllable. So this is a whole new problem for me. So I'm now creating these increasing numbers of constraints within which I'm going to have to produce a translation. And I can't just change it. I can't make it a pineapple, which would scan, or a melon, or a grapefruit, all of which would scan. Because annoyingly, it's all over the pictures. And however much I might, because frankly the book is such a surreal that it could easily be happen as a pineapple on your head, or a grapefruit on your head, or whatever. But this quite clearly isn't a pineapple or a grapefruit. It's the only thing that is realistic in the whole wretched book is the watermelon. So I can't change it. So I find myself in a slightly peculiar situation where I have a lot of very complicated constraints, including not being able to mention the most important noun in the book. And where I'm producing something which to me feels like it's a completely faithful translation, but not a faithful translation that is faithful to the original text. I think it's faithful to the original book because the book is wacky and the pictures are weird and very colourful and strange and that kind of thing. But I'm doing very different things with the text. So we start drafting the translation. At the end of the village, this was how it started, in fact, when I lived in At the end of the village, whatever that is, lived happy Miss something with Melvin, her bull. At the end of the village, something rhyming with bull, which I will think of in a moment, lived happy Miss with Melvin, her bull. So Miss Gulinaza has to have a two-syllable name. Trouble I'm creating for myself. She has to have a two-syllable name with a stress on the first syllable. So she could be Happiness Glowing, which is a terrible name, but for the purposes of now, it's glowing. It's a literal translation, more or less. At the end of the village, lived Happiness Glowing with Melvin, her bull. You have a thought? It could be brilliant, but you have to say brilliant after two-syllable words rather than three-syllable. Brilliant, rather than brilliant. But brilliant we probably do. At the end of the village, or lived Happiness, brilliant, with Melvin, her bull. We then have one more, to read this to you. We then have one more couplet on this page, in which we have to convey the following things. The first couplet, at the end of the village, or lived happiness something with Melvin, her bull. We then have another couplet which has to convey the following things. It has to say, they used to climb a tree, she used to play the cello, and he used to sing his old long-forgotten songs. And those things have to fit into the next couplet. And we have to introduce Melvin because, well, no, we've mentioned him by name first. This was the first draft. She would climb up a tree to a glorious height to play cello while Melvin just beamed in delight. There are two problems with that. The first of which is she does it every morning. You have to get the fact that it's happening as a repeated action. So every morning they'd climb up their favourite trees and their beautiful music would float on the breeze, which is very cheesy, but not only is it very cheesy, it also has the problem that we haven't said what he's doing. And what Melvin is doing is much funnier than anything else in this. So we have to keep him in. We have, every morning she'd take up her cello and climb up a tree to play music while Melvin kept time. She would sit in a treetop, except when it rained, and play cello for Melvin, who never complained. But the problem is, he's actually singing. You can't tell from the picture because the pictures are weird, but we know that he's definitely singing. So she would climb up a tree every morning at 8 to play cello for Melvin, who's singing. It was great. They sang the cello while Melvin would wait. She would climb up a tree every morning at 9 to play cello for Melvin, who's singing. It's fine. Or his voice was divine, I preferred. She would climb up a tree every morning at 7 to play cello for Melvin, whose singing was heaven. Fortunately, we don't know what time it is, so I can make up whatever time rhymes conveniently. Every morning Miss G climbed a tree with her pet, and they played and they sang their melodious duet. Every morning she'd sit in her tree playing a song on the cello while Melvin just yodeled along. This one I thought was rather sinister. She'd sit in a treetop, a nest high and wild, and played songs on her cello while Melvin just smiled. And every morning she'd sit in her favourite tree to play songs on her cello while Melvin made tea. Which would be quite amusing, but isn't what's happening in the pictures, which is annoying. I'm going to show you how it ended up. We'll see what you think. Happiness is watermelon, I guess. Yes, won't tell you. Oh, no, the title page is different, but the title page is just made by the publisher. So, no, the other thing, if I'd been allowed to change the pictures, my life would have been much easier. It's seems to be brighter, in fact, than this one. Good. At the end of the village, behind a green door, lived happy Miss Jolly. Jolly will do. With Melvin, her daughter. Each morning she'd sit in her tree, playing a song on her cello, while Melvin sang sweetly about her. What makes her so happy, in direct speech, you will notice, what makes her so happy, we really must learn, cried her neighbours, Miss Winberg, Miss Grouch, and Miss Stern, who conveniently rhyme. It's awful, lots of direct speech, it's awful being miserable day after day. Let's find out the secret. There must be a way. The very next day, what a sight met her eye. It's happy Miss Jolly just frolicking by with a smile on her face, and good morning, she said, with a skip in her step, and with fruit on her head. You know, just a page turn. It's a little bit better. That's it! Indirect speech, cried Miss Stern. That's the trick, it's so clever, we need hats make food. We'll be happy forever. So they ran to her kitchen and rummaged about for a nice bunch of radishes, cauliflower. Thank you very much. Then they strapped them all on, tied them fast, pinned them down, and stepped out delighted to dazzle the town. Such beautiful hats, what a sight, what a show. Did those hats make them happy now? No. So, they tried clocks, they tried pots, they tried forks, they tried twigs, fantastical rockets and thingamajigs. The hats were ingenious, remarkable, mad, but how are the women? Still dreadfully sad. Nothing worked. Try the cellos at one, climb the tree. Maybe that's why Miss Jolly's more happy than me. That's it, cried her friends, and began their ascent. Higher and higher and higher they went. But like 4 large ripe fruits, so heavy and round, they all, with the cello, thumped back to the ground. But wait, cried Miss Grouch, I have the best idea yet. Maybe being happy is having a pet. Miss Jolly has Melvin, you know, but what a bore. We'll have birds, said Mr. and monkeys galore, something green, said Mr. Something long, something small, and they did. And what happened then? Nothing. So that's it. They give up. What else did they do? They were sadder than ever. Their pets were sad too. Because they noticed, I pointed out that one really sad pet. The one bearer of our picture. Their pets were sad too. As they dragged themselves homeward in gloom and despair, giant green something came flying through the air. It brushed past the tip of a rocking horse hat, very specifically mentioning what's on the hat, right? Brushed past the tip of a rocking horse hat as it whizzed through the air and came down with a splat. Attack, cried Miss Jane. She showered them with fruit as she raced through the town with her roaring pursuit. Soon the battle spread to stupendous excess, and the whole of the town was a pink sticky mess. When the chaos was done, as they lay on the ground, Miss Wimper, Miss Stern, and Miss Grouch looked around, little covered with pips, with pop, and with goo. One had juice in her hat, one had seeds in her shoes. They lay there defeated, exhausted, and sore, those 3 sorry women. And no one in the ball. And one of the women. But wait, what's this? Could that be the trace of a smirk or a grin or a smile on her face? Yes. All sticky and well, slimy and pink, what a sight. They giggled and hooted and danced with delight. We did it, we did it. Their sadness had passed, and they laughed and they loved, and were happy at last. The end.
The translation is better than the original.
Well, I like to think so. So there are lots of reasons why I like to show this to people. One is because I'm quite proud of it, but I think also it does raise quite an interesting question about things I mentioned this morning, like what is my job as a translator, what am I trying to do, first of all, and what do we mean when we talk about fidelity? What are we being faithful to? Because I think my text is very faithful to the pictures and the spirit of a wacky, playful story. It's not faithful to the original text, but I think, partly I think we get this. But I do think it is absolutely faithful to something. I don't think it's inappropriate, but it's a slightly different, it's thinking about translation in a slightly different way. Because, partly because it's for children, partly because it's illustrated, because there are certain constraints, partly because I'm thinking about what an illustrated book, what the mode of an illustrated book in English typically is. And partly because I'm questioning what to what I owe my fidelity. So is this a translation then?
Co-creation.
Recreation, that's translation, that's something else. Co-creation. Yeah, it's not writing anything. It's not a translation of a text in the way you think about it. It's thinking much more about how you create a thing that works, a finished thing that works, and it's much more interested in that than in the original text.
The important thing is to convey the message.
But even if the original text doesn't really do that.
Even if the original text doesn't do that, so you did it through pictures, because the original text separately is something that when it is combined with the illustrations, it's already one new creation that you translate.
Yeah. So you're thinking about the whole thing, not just the text. Strange, isn't it? I mean, not just the book is strange, but the phenomenon is strange. So because I think the translation is a much better, not a much better text because that's irrelevant, but I think the translation is a much better book. It's a much better picture than the original.
Because it's thought over.
Because it's exactly right. I've thought through all those things and I thought through those relationships between those things at the time in the original. But it doesn't to me feel like it's, in any significant way, it doesn't feel like it's transgressive because I think you used the word spirit on it. I think it's trying to understand what the original writer was doing and try to do that thing as well as it's possible to do it.
And maybe we'll try to do it.
Yeah, if I can understand what they're trying to do. So,
And maybe if the author said something or wrote something, maybe unconsciously, you translating it to more in a conscious way.
yeah, so maybe the original just didn't reflect all the things that she wanted to say.
And in this case, it's like the book has more than one illustrator. It's like the author had this idea and the illustrator came out.
As it happened in this instance, it was one person who did the pictures and the text originally. So the illustrator, I don't think she's a great writer, I think she's an amazing illustrator. I think she's a brilliant illustrator who wrote a bit of text to go with her pictures.
Because the illustrator also added a lot of things on her card, right? Like
Yeah.
the rocking chair, and the text simply said the unimaginary.
All kinds of imaginary things, yeah.
And so the illustrator had to think and had to add her own touch.
But it's the same person though.
It's the same person.
So basically she did, and I think she did the pictures first. So all those things, so the amazing imagination in the original is in the illustrations, I think. That's more or less
Do you
exciting.
have any book reviews that you could share? Or any monitoring results on how you boosted the sale of this book after it was listed?
Well, what unfortunately you can't compare because there isn't you don't know what the sales would have been if I left it. I mean, it sold fine in my translation. But unfortunately, that only tells you what the picture book market was like in Brazil, which is not comparable. But you can see how, remember this page in the original had no words. So all the illustrator was doing was creating this very well imagined, very vivid, very full of movement and colour image, and doing everything with the picture. Yeah, please.
And you and the publisher decide unanimously without the consent of the author, whether you're going to, the author should give the consent.
Yes, it depends on what level of change. I mean, usually this is always the case. If you're not doing anything that feels at all risky, then the author doesn't approve because the author usually can't read their translations anyway. If you're doing something as drastic as this, the author needs to consent. And in this particular instance, we sent this version, my rhyming version, to the author, illustrator originally, and said, what do you think of this? This is what, my editor Emma wrote to Stella and said, so Danny's done this translation, it's rhyming a verse, what do you think? And we got no answer. And then after 2 weeks of no answer, the longest 2 weeks of my life. And we're thinking, because if she actually hates it, we have to use what we know is a worse text. And that would be really good to deliberately use a bad. And so after 2 weeks, Emma wrote to Stella again and said, did you hate it? And Stella wrote back and said, no, it was great. I thought it was great. Didn't I tell you? She's very a little bit flaky. So we were there thinking that it was a complete disaster. But no, it turns out she loved it. And actually, I think one of the reasons she likes it, Stella the illustrator, right? I think, this is a slightly weird thing to say, but I think one of the reasons she likes it is because I think it was my text. I think her pictures look better.
Is it the better feedback like this? Oh, that's
Yeah. No, she loved it, and she loved it, and she tells people about it, and there are other editions in other places in the world that use this as the original, instead of using the original as the original. But I genuinely think that the pictures look better with English text than with Portuguese text. Because the English text makes you look at the pictures. The English text makes you notice them. The English text makes you pause in certain places. It's very special, but it makes the pictures vivid. And I think that's quite an interesting thing. The pictures are not in fact changed. We use the same files, exactly the same pictures. But I think they look better with English text, Portuguese text. Which again is something we think about very often. That one of the things that will determine what pictures look like is what the words you're hearing. Again, remember the child that's looking at that, only looking at the pictures and only hearing the words. But if you have a text which sounds good, which is easy to read about, which has a nice rhythm to it, and which makes you notice what's in the pictures, makes you pause, makes you turn the page at very calculated moments. I think this is enormously in the service of pictures. It didn't take very long to kind of draft it, but then just kind of, I did the first one, the first one in 2 hours, and then I did the first verse one in 2 or 3 hours. But then, over the next couple of weeks, I would keep coming back to it, reading it aloud and going, it's not quite right, and I read it, something not quite right. I read it, my sister has small children, I read it to them, and reading it aloud, you realise that it's a little bit too heavy, the ending isn't quite enough, just to get that ending right. Interestingly, the ending is almost exactly the same as the Portuguese. The Portuguese ends with, and they laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh. Which in fact is perfectly metric. But I kept coming back to it until I got to where it finally ends. We did it, their sadness had passed, and they laughed, and they laughed. That was happy with
very nice attitude of the translation, and very precious one.
it is, but you can imagine some writers would not approve entirely. I mean, I think it's fun. But
Thank you for sharing.
but I wanted to kind of open up that thing which came up this morning about actually what your job is when you're translating. And particularly when you think about children, particularly when it's something which is illustrated. How much you think about who your readers are and what are you being faithful to. Just being faithful to the original doesn't tell me anything. Give you something very difficult to do. I'm going to translate the nursery rhyme from Portuguese. So I've put, as you'll see, I've put a little English thing so you know what it means. So the little English thing attached, you can see what the meaning is. If you look at the Portuguese, you'll see it has certain characteristics, like some of the words, the last syllable is repeated a few times. Agile o gato